In the bustling chaos of our modern world, where notifications never cease and distractions multiply like shadows at dusk, we have forgotten the profound wisdom that once guided emperors and slaves alike toward unshakable inner peace. The ancient Stoics understood something that we, in our technological sophistication, have lost: that true power comes not from controlling the world around us, but from mastering the world within us. Today we stand at a crossroads between the reactive, emotionally driven existence that society promotes and the disciplined, virtue-centered life that leads to genuine fulfillment. The habits we're about to explore are not merely inconveniences or minor character flaws. They are the very chains that bind us to suffering, the invisible prison bars that keep us trapped in cycles of frustration, anxiety, and perpetual dissatisfaction. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal that would become Meditations, never imagined his words would reach across 2 millennia to offer salvation to souls drowning in the overwhelm of the 21st century. Yet here we are, desperately needing the same wisdom that guided him through plagues, wars, and the immense responsibility of ruling an empire. The transformation you're about to undergo is not merely intellectual. It is a complete rewiring of your relationship with reality itself. The first destructive pattern that must be uprooted from your life is the habit of allowing your emotions to dictate your actions and decisions. In every moment of every day, you are presented with a choice that will either elevate you toward wisdom or drag you deeper into chaos. Will you respond to circumstances from a place of rational consideration, or will you react from the turbulent whirlpool of immediate emotional impulse? Epictetus, who rose from the degradation of slavery to become one of history's most revered teachers, understood that emotional reactivity is the hallmark of a mind that has surrendered its sovereignty. When you allow anger to control your words, fear to paralyze your progress, or excitement to cloud your judgment, you are not living as a human being was designed to live. You are functioning as a sophisticated animal driven by instinct rather than reason. The Stoics taught that emotions are not events that happen to you, but rather judgments you make about events, and therefore they remain entirely within your control. Every time you say, "I couldn't help myself," or "I was so angry I had to respond," you are lying to yourself and abandoning the very faculty that separates you from the beasts of the field. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he could choose his response to any situation, regardless of how others behaved or what circumstances presented themselves. This is not about suppressing emotions or becoming a cold, unfeeling automaton. It is about recognizing that your emotional state is a choice, not a destiny. When you master this fundamental principle, you reclaim your power from every person and situation that previously held you hostage through your own reactivity. Another poison that seeps into the soul and corrupts everything it touches is the victim mentality that convinces you that your circumstances are more powerful than your character. This insidious habit whispers that you are at the mercy of your past, your genetics, your upbringing, your economic situation, or any number of external factors that supposedly determine your fate. Seneca, who experienced both tremendous wealth and devastating loss, understood that this mindset is perhaps the most limiting belief a human being can adopt. When you consistently interpret events through the lens of "why is this happening to me?" rather than "how can I grow from this?" you transform yourself from the protagonist of your own story into a helpless victim of circumstances. The victim mentality is seductive because it absolves you of responsibility and grants you permission to remain stuck, but it comes at the cost of your personal power and dignity. Every challenge in your life is either a stepping stone or a stumbling block, depending entirely on how you choose to perceive and respond to it. The Stoics knew that while you cannot control what happens to you, you can always control what you make it mean and how you let it shape you. This doesn't mean denying that difficult things happen or pretending that all circumstances are equal. It means recognizing that your response to any situation is where your true power lies. When you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" you begin to reclaim the authority over your life that the victim mentality had stolen. This shift in perspective transforms every obstacle into an opportunity for growth and every setback into a setup for a stronger comeback. The third habit that must be eliminated is the compulsive need to control outcomes, people, and circumstances that lie entirely outside your sphere of influence. This futile struggle against reality is the source of more human suffering than perhaps any other single cause, yet it is so normalized in our culture that we rarely recognize it as the mental poison it truly is. Marcus Aurelius spent considerable time reflecting on the dichotomy of control, recognizing that peace comes only to those who focus their energy on what they can actually influence, while accepting with grace what lies beyond their power. When you constantly worry about others' opinions, obsess over future scenarios you cannot predict, or torment yourself trying to force outcomes that depend on variables outside your control, you are engaged in a battle you cannot win. This habit manifests in countless ways. Losing sleep over a job interview result that has already been decided, arguing with family members to try to change their fundamental beliefs, or spending emotional energy on political events that will unfold regardless of your anxiety about them. The irony is that the more tightly you grip what you cannot control, the less effectively you manage what you actually can control. Your energy becomes scattered across 100 different concerns instead of concentrated on the few areas where you can make a genuine difference. Epictetus taught his students to begin each day by clearly distinguishing between what depends on them and what does not, and to pour all their attention into the former while maintaining philosophical indifference toward the latter. This is not apathy or resignation. It is the wisdom to recognize where your power actually lies and to use it effectively rather than dissipating it in futile struggles against immutable realities. The fourth destructive pattern is the habit of seeking validation, approval, and worth from external sources, rather than cultivating an unshakable sense of self-respect based on your own moral standards and character development. This dependency on others' opinions transforms you into a puppet whose strings are pulled by every person whose approval you crave, making your emotional state contingent on factors completely outside your control. When your sense of worth fluctuates based on compliments or criticism, when you modify your behavior to gain acceptance rather than to align with your values, when you feel crushed by disapproval or inflated by praise, you have surrendered your inner sovereignty to the whims and judgments of others. Seneca observed that those who live for applause will die from criticism, understanding that external validation is as unreliable as it is intoxicating. The people whose approval you seek are themselves flawed, biased, and inconsistent. They may approve of you today and condemn you tomorrow based on their own changing moods, interests, or circumstances. More importantly, their opinion of you says more about them than it does about you, reflecting their own values, experiences, and limitations rather than any objective truth about your worth as a human being. The Stoics cultivated what they called the inner scorecard, a set of internal standards based on virtue and character that remained constant regardless of external feedback. When you know that you have acted with integrity, courage, wisdom, and justice, the opinions of others become interesting information rather than determinants of your self-worth. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive of all feedback, but rather developing the discernment to distinguish between constructive input that can help you grow and empty criticism or hollow praise that serves no purpose other than to disturb your peace. Another habit that corrodes the soul is the tendency to constantly compare yourself to others, measuring your progress, achievements, and worth against the carefully curated presentations that others offer to the world. This practice is particularly toxic in our age of social media, where you are constantly exposed to highlight reels that bear no resemblance to the full reality of others' lives. Yet you compare these polished presentations to your own behind-the-scenes struggles and insecurities. Marcus Aurelius understood that each person's journey is unique, shaped by different circumstances, abilities, challenges, and purposes, making comparison not only useless, but actively harmful to your peace of mind and progress. When you measure your chapter 3 against someone else's chapter 20, when you compare your struggles to their successes without knowing the full story of what they endured to get there, when you allow others' achievements to diminish your sense of your own progress, you rob yourself of the satisfaction that comes from recognizing how far you have traveled on your own path. The comparison habit also breeds either superiority or inferiority, both of which are forms of ego that separate you from the humble recognition of our shared humanity. The Stoics taught that the only meaningful comparison is between who you are today and who you were yesterday, between your current choices and your potential for virtue and growth. Everyone is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying burdens invisible to your eyes, and dealing with challenges that would break you if you face them with your current level of development. Your job is not to judge your progress against others, but to ensure that you are moving forward on your own journey toward wisdom, virtue, and inner peace. When you focus on your own development rather than others' accomplishments, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of envy and competition while directing your energy toward the only progress that truly matters: your own. The sixth habit that must be purged is the addiction to immediate gratification and the inability to delay pleasure for the sake of long-term benefit and character development. This modern plague has been amplified by technology and consumer culture, but the Stoics recognized it as a fundamental threat to human flourishing long before smartphones and social media existed. When you consistently choose the easy path over the right path, when you prioritize comfort over growth, when you sacrifice your future self for the temporary pleasure of your present self, you are building a life of regret and missed potential. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of voluntary discomfort and the practice of occasionally denying yourself pleasures you could easily afford, understanding that this builds the psychological muscle necessary to make difficult choices when they truly matter. The habit of instant gratification manifests in countless ways: choosing entertainment over education, procrastinating on important tasks to avoid discomfort, avoiding difficult conversations that could improve relationships, or indulging in behaviors that feel good in the moment but undermine your health, relationships, or goals. Each time you choose immediate pleasure over long-term benefit, you are training yourself to be weak when strength is required, to be impulsive when discipline is needed, to be reactive when wisdom calls for patience. The Stoics understood that true pleasure comes not from indulgence, but from the satisfaction of knowing you have chosen wisely, acted with integrity, and built something meaningful rather than merely consuming what others have created. This requires developing what they called present bias correction, the ability to accurately weigh present costs against future benefits and to choose based on your long-term interests rather than your immediate impulses. When you master this skill, you gain access to a level of life satisfaction that those trapped in instant gratification cycles can never experience. The seventh destructive pattern is the habit of dwelling on past mistakes, regrets, and missed opportunities rather than learning from them and redirecting your energy toward present choices and future possibilities. This backward-focused mindset transforms your history from a teacher into a prison, trapping you in cycles of guilt, shame, and self-recrimination that serve no constructive purpose and prevent you from moving forward with wisdom and confidence. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself that the past exists only in memory and the future only in anticipation, while real life unfolds entirely in the present moment where your actual power resides. When you replay past conversations, wondering what you should have said differently, when you torment yourself with what-if scenarios about roads not taken, when you carry guilt about mistakes that cannot be undone, you are choosing to live in a timeline that no longer exists while neglecting the timeline where you can actually make a difference. The Stoics distinguished between healthy reflection that extracts wisdom from experience and unhealthy rumination that simply reopens old wounds without producing any beneficial outcome. Every mistake you have made, every opportunity you have missed, every poor choice you have made is information that can inform better decisions going forward, but only if you process it rationally rather than emotionally. The past cannot be changed, but it can be redeemed through the wisdom you extract from it and apply to current circumstances. This doesn't mean ignoring the consequences of past actions or failing to make amends where possible. It means refusing to let historical events control your present choices or define your future possibilities. When you learn to mine your past for wisdom while living fully in the present, you transform your entire life story from a collection of regrets into a curriculum for growth. Another habit that undermines your development is the constant seeking of external stimulation and the inability to sit comfortably with silence, solitude, and your own thoughts. In our hyper-connected world, this manifests as the compulsive checking of phones, the need for background noise or entertainment at all times, and the anxiety that arises when you are left alone with nothing but your own mind for company. Seneca spent considerable time writing about the importance of solitude and reflection, understanding that wisdom emerges only when you create space for deep thinking, self-examination, and philosophical contemplation. When you fill every moment with external input, when you run from silence as if it were an enemy, when you constantly seek distraction from your own thoughts and feelings, you prevent the very introspection that leads to self-knowledge and personal growth. The habit of constant stimulation creates a shallow, reactive existence where you are always responding to external triggers rather than acting from internal wisdom and intentionality. More importantly, it reveals a deep discomfort with your own inner life, a fear of what you might discover if you actually spent time getting to know yourself without the buffer of endless entertainment and distraction. The Stoics practiced regular periods of solitude, not as punishment or deprivation, but as essential maintenance for the soul, opportunities to process experiences, examine their choices, and reconnect with their core values and long-term goals. When you develop the ability to be comfortable in your own company, when you can sit in silence without immediately reaching for a device or distraction, when you learn to enjoy the richness of your own thoughts and the peace of mental stillness, you discover a source of strength and clarity that no external circumstance can touch. This inner sanctuary becomes your refuge in times of difficulty and your launching pad for purposeful action in the world. The ninth habit that must be eliminated is the tendency to blame external circumstances, other people, or fate for your problems, failures, and dissatisfaction, rather than taking full responsibility for your responses, choices, and outcomes. This blame-focused mindset is perhaps the most disempowering habit you can develop because it places the locus of control outside yourself, making you a passive victim of circumstances rather than an active agent in your own life. Epictetus, who understood victimhood intimately through his experience as a slave, taught that true freedom comes only when you accept complete responsibility for your internal state, regardless of external conditions. When you consistently attribute your problems to your boss, your spouse, your genetics, your government, or your circumstances, you are essentially declaring yourself powerless to change your situation. While it's true that you don't control everything that happens to you, you do control how you interpret events, how you respond to challenges, and what actions you take moving forward. The blame habit is seductive because it protects your ego from the discomfort of acknowledging your own role in creating or perpetuating your problems, but it comes at the enormous cost of your personal power and growth potential. Every moment you spend blaming others is a moment you could spend improving your situation through better choices, different strategies, or changed behaviors. The Stoics understood that responsibility is not a burden but a gift, because it means that your life is in your hands rather than at the mercy of external forces. When you stop asking, "Whose fault is this?" and start asking, "What can I do about this?" you reclaim your power and begin to create the changes you want to see in your life. This shift doesn't mean ignoring the role that others play in creating difficulties, but it means focusing your energy on the part of the equation you can actually control, your own response. The final and perhaps most insidious habit is the pursuit of pleasure, comfort, and ease as your primary life objectives, rather than the development of character, the practice of virtue, and the fulfillment of your highest potential as a human being. This hedonistic approach to life, which our consumer culture actively promotes, leads to a shallow existence focused on accumulating experiences, possessions, and sensations while neglecting the deeper work of becoming who you were meant to be. Marcus Aurelius understood that pleasure-seeking as a life strategy ultimately leads to emptiness because external pleasures are temporary, addictive, and incapable of providing the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your highest values and principles. When your primary goal is comfort, you avoid the challenges that build character. When your focus is pleasure, you miss the profound joy that comes from meaningful contribution. When you prioritize ease, you forfeit the strength that emerges from overcoming difficulty. The Stoics didn't advocate for a joyless existence devoid of pleasure, but they understood that pleasure should be a natural byproduct of virtuous living rather than the primary objective. True fulfillment comes from knowing that you have used your talents wisely, treated others justly, faced challenges courageously, and developed your character through both success and failure. This kind of satisfaction is durable and internal, independent of external circumstances, and immune to the inevitable changes that life brings. When you orient your life around virtue rather than pleasure, around contribution rather than consumption, around growth rather than comfort, you discover a richness of experience that those trapped in hedonistic cycles never access. The paradox is that by not making pleasure your goal, you actually experience more genuine joy because that joy emerges from the deep satisfaction of living with integrity and purpose. You now stand at the threshold of transformation, armed with the ancient wisdom that has guided seekers toward inner peace and authentic power for over 2,000 years. These habits we have examined are not merely inconveniences or minor character flaws. They are the very foundations of human suffering, the invisible architecture of anxiety, frustration, and dissatisfaction that plagues our modern world. But here is the profound truth that the Stoics discovered and that you must now embrace. Every one of these destructive patterns is within your power to change. You are not a victim of your conditioning, your circumstances, or your past choices. You are the sovereign ruler of your own mind, the architect of your own character, the author of your own story from this moment forward. The path ahead requires discipline, patience, and the courage to choose growth over comfort. But it leads to a life of unshakable peace, authentic confidence, and deep satisfaction that no external circumstance can disturb. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus faced challenges that would break most people. Yet they emerged as giants of human achievement because they understood that true strength comes from within, that real power lies in self-mastery, and that the highest human calling is the development of virtue and wisdom. You have been given the same tools, the same potential, the same opportunity to transform your existence from reactive to responsive, from chaotic to calm, from ordinary to extraordinary. The choice, as always, is yours. Choose wisely, choose courageously, and choose now. For the life you have always wanted is waiting on the other side of the habits you are willing to abandon.